Hello everybody, Adrian Pass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
So, I know this is number 97, would you believe? In Sounding Shadows.
It's also, Adrian, isn't it our third time of speaking to people just before Easter? Because the first one was shortly after we'd begun No Shore in Sight, wasn't
No,
it?
that's right. You're absolutely right, the third one. And just for anything else, as some people will know, we actually contracted COVID a few days
Joined
ago.
the multitudes, really.
Oh, exactly. But we just wanted to thank you, those who've written such kind
Yes.
emails and messages and in sympathy, and we are getting through it. And I hope you are, if you've got it or had it. And it does linger, doesn't it? I know that's been an experience with a number of people.
But if you think back to that spring, Adrian, in 2020, it was a very different world, wasn't it? Just coming up to Easter, the numbers were so terrible of people on ventilators, people dying. It's easy to forget just how terrible it was. But you wrote something around then, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just an attempt to say something about how I was feeling about it, because as with now, in fact, the springtime has come. Daffodils are everywhere. All the spring flowers.
All signs of hope that we always talk about
are beginning to grow. Yeah, all the signs of hope, and yet terrible things are happening. We've talked about Ukraine every week. We know lots of people are still getting ill, and there's sometimes, we've been talking about the whole resurrection principle, not just the theological one, but the hope that things live, they come back to life. For some people, that's a very hard thing to go. We had one email, didn't we? A very vulnerable one this week from somebody who's just facing coming back to faith, to believing after years and years and years. And I thought it was so brave and so hopeful. But yeah, this was something written back in, would it be 2020?
Yeah,
probably. Yeah,
it was.
And of course, being professional Christians, we know which side our manor is butted on, I can tell you. We are in the business of hope, aren't we? So we're usually trying to be hopeful, but it got a bit difficult. So I was trying to convey how difficult it was in a springtime when so many were dying. Today, all metaphors of hope are neatly folded. They're tucked away for safety in a drawer. Soon, we will retrieve all those silver linings. And yes, we'll hope as we have always hoped before. And now, even metaphors of pain and loss collapse today into their component parts. One survives, a wash of death and colour. Autumn leaves in springtime. They break our hearts.
But what I think is so significant about that, Adrian, is that it was so incredibly, tangibly real. Nobody could see a way through it, a way out. There was no knowledge about the possibility of a vaccine. There was no understanding that it could get to the point where people could live with COVID alongside.
No, that's right.
And that sums up this particular week in the year each year, doesn't it? The people who were with Jesus, they had no idea of the resurrection. It was not, I know they've been told things, but they were in a week of pain and bewilderment and anxiety without knowing about the hope that was going to be there. And when you wrote that poem, that's where things were, wasn't it?
It was so dark, wasn't it? And I don't think I ever quite admitted to myself how frightened we'd got by what was going on. I had no idea how it would end. But we've seen resurrections, haven't we?
Well, that's one of them. The vaccine was one of them.
We've seen them. And I know some people will be saying, well, I've lost someone I love, and many will. And we can only leave the way open for resurrection there. And it's easy to say trust God. It isn't easy sometimes, very, very difficult. I jokingly sometimes say I've learned not to trust God. But I think what I mean by that is that I've learned not to ever speak in cliches or ever say, I know this will happen, because I don't know what will happen.
Any more than one knows what's going on in somebody else.
That's right,
Grief is such an extraordinary thing, isn't it? And people react in so many different ways. And again, back to the Easter story, that level of tension, that level of fear and anxiety caused people to react in different ways.
Yeah. And resurrection isn't always total, is it? I mean, I think we've quite often talked about Naomi, because she lost everything, didn't she? And she didn't get it all back, did she? It's an interesting story.
Well, you don't get back people that have died, do
No,
you?
you don't,
And that is fact. And you learn to live with it. And I remember a really good friend of ours, Adrian, saying that at the beginning the grief filled the whole, if you like, a whole bottle. And then gradually there was more space in the bottle. The grief was still there, but somehow there was more air around it, more possibility. And I suppose that was Naomi's story. I mean, the grief was there. She lost her husband and her sons and one of her beloved daughter-in-laws. But there was a hope that she had no idea. And there's those amazing words, aren't there, where she has this grandchild and she takes this grandchild, Obed onto her knee. The people of Bethlehem say, Look, Naomi has a son. It is the most beautiful example of a resurrection, of a new life.
And the resurrection of hope in relationship, because of her seeing that Ruth really loves her.
Yeah,
and
that's
true.
Knowing
you're loved is a huge part of the resurrection principle.
Absolutely. And it's Good Friday today. I mean, I've so often thought that as Jesus looked down from the cross, there was good old John, and there was Mary, and there was other women who'd been so loyal to him. And I'm sure there were other people in the crowd as well that he looked at. And there they still were, hanging on in, with no hope whatsoever. Yeah. It's always such a special day, isn't it? Good Friday.
It's sometimes even surprising when things do come good.
What were you thinking?
Well, I was. We often have talked about Scargill House, where we've worked quite a lot over the last few years, and that died, didn't it?
Oh well, that's true, and that came back to life. Yeah, absolutely.
But it really died. It stopped.
Absolutely,
and all the principles that would make it what it was.
Yeah, I think that applied to lots of
gone.
Christian conference centres and retreat centres that have been such an important sort of oasis point for people on their journey that just were not there during COVID. And I know with Scargill it was different again because it literally had closed and reopened, but there's little resurrections going on all over the place, I think.
What do you think with the... why do you think that resurrection happened? I mean, leaving aside for the moment God wanting it to, because I mean, like we say, there's no. I'm sure he did, but I don't know. I'm not party to his decision making. But as we looked at it, what do you think made it possible for that to?
Well, I think it was a few good people not giving up.
Yeah, that's true.
Hanging on in. Standing, if you like, at the foot of the cross of a place that had been so important to them and seemed to have died, but not giving up and fighting very, very hard. You can see it in Ukraine today, can't you? People with nothing and very little real hope and a huge amount of fear, and we don't have any idea what it is to live in a country that's been occupied, not once, but more than once, but they're still hanging on in there, and I don't know, they're hanging on to God, judging from some of the people that we've heard from, and they're hanging on to hope,
despite,
not because.
Yeah. It's a tragedy, isn't it, to think of somewhere people like the city of I'm going to get it wrong, Mariupol, where because of the lack of the most basic requirements like water and food, suddenly you must wonder if you're a human being at all.
Yeah.
And your instincts become to protect those closest to you, and you wonder what you would do to survive in situations like that. And perhaps you feel, I wasn't what I thought I was.
Like Peter, the classic Good Friday story of Peter, who suddenly realised he wasn't quite what he thought he was either. You know, there he was fighting away for Jesus in Gethsemane. There he was following him to the courtyard, and then not doing too well, of course.
Yeah, and that actually is I know I got on and on and on about Peter, but his resurrection, if you like, it wasn't just discovering he was a good bloke after all, because that's not what resurrection in the broadest sense is about. It's about being lifted up and finding that some of it doesn't matter. And with Peter, of course, you know that you see this shape on the beach. John says, "Look, it's him." And Peter sees Jesus there and runs and runs and runs, not to become a good bloke, but because he loves him. And right at the centre of any resurrection process is love, is the belief that things will change. But there will be people listening to this who will say, yeah, but I am right down in the poo with this. I don't feel that. I'm not feeling it. And we'll say a little prayer for you in a minute. But yeah, it takes all forms. I mean, I knew a boy who was scared of autumn.
Right.
I know this sounds odd, but he was scared of autumn because he loved autumn, but every year the leaves fell off.
Yeah.
And then the winter came.
He's not alone, Adrian. For a lot of people, they have a dread and a genuine fear.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody just the other week who said that they hang on to summer for as long as possible because they are so afraid of autumn and the death of what they see as the death of the year, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that it wasn't me, it was somebody else. I know that child survived because when you've had a few autumns that followed
Spring does keep coming.
Spring does keep coming back.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, but like I said, it does take all different forms. We've talked about the chap we knew who had another 10 years to live when he thought he was going to die.
Ah, well, and the thing about him was, yes, I mean, he was an older man, wasn't he? And he'd been really poorly, and he'd been told he'd got extra time that he wasn't expecting.
Sorry, that's our dog barking at somebody, another dog through the window.
It's a very small dog, and she is only ever fierce through the window at dogs that walk past up the road outside our house. Yes, when she actually meets those dogs outside, she's not at all brave. But I was going to say, the thing about him, if you remember, Adrian, was that he thought, what can I do with this special extra time?
Yeah.
What job, if you like, have I got? And it was interesting what he decided, wasn't it?
Yeah, because he was such a sweet person.
Yeah, he was.
And he was a minister, and he'd grown up in the Christian culture, which says, I think too easily says, you know, I have a relationship with Jesus, I've asked Jesus into my life, all those vast concepts that as you unwrap them and look at them and test them and try them and wait to see if they're true and are pleased they are and wonder if they've all gone, to be able to have another period of time to really go into that relationship. And I know we go on and on about that, but those are the things that live. It's like we've often talked about whether animals go to heaven, and I've no idea whether animals go to heaven or not, but what I do know is that where there is love, it will not be wasted. In some way that often I think we can't understand, it will not be wasted. And I do have a hope in me about that. I don't understand the practicalities of it, obviously, sometimes. But I feel so pleased that we do at least have a dimension of hope in us, that it is possible for darkness and for difficulty to change. We ought to mention my famous illness, oughtn't we? I mean, gone on about it far too much, but those who don't know, had an operation a few weeks ago, or end of last year, where I didn't even know it was going on, but as far as you were concerned, it could have had 3 very dismal outcomes.
Yes. Well, one would be that you weren't here anymore, but the other 2 were pretty awful as well. Of course they were, yeah. So you had your own special plus resurrection.
Yes. Yes. I don't quite know what that means. I know they drilled a hole in my head, and that seemed to do the trick. Yeah. A little while ago, no, some time ago now, everybody knows, don't they, the first chapter of Corinthians 13. It's the love chapter. And it's become almost iconic because people use it for weddings and they use it for...
Oh, absolutely. It's been adopted by the world, not just by Christians. Yeah. I've always rather liked that, if I'm honest. I know people feel... Great. Sometimes, but they don't really, do they really believe it? But I think just it's part of, isn't it? It's part of remembering what love actually is about.
Yeah.
It's about rather a lot, really.
Well, I was reading it one day, as you know, and I looked at the fact that it was about love. Right? Paul is saying love is this, it's that, it's that. And I thought, well, if love is God, how would God express that? How would he say those words of that chapter? I am this, I am that, I am that. So I have done that. I mean, I'm not going to read it, don't worry, it's quite long. But I was trying to look from the heart of God, or just to pretend I was, to see how he will put that. And there are some tricky things, you know.
What, like what?
Well, this particular issue, there's a point in it where I say something like, in the voice of God, shall I tell you what success looks like? And you may be very disappointed. Success can look very much like failure. Success can look like crucifixion. Success can look like you've reached the point where there is no way back or forward. But in the heart of God is the knowledge that principle, the resurrection principle, and don't ask me to explain the logic of it all, the resurrection principle is the one that pushes and guides and takes people forward. And it's why at the end of that famous chapter it says there are 3 things that survive. One is faith, one is hope, and the other is love. And love is the greatest of those. And that's the thing that makes and will make the difference for almost everything. And I'm so sorry for those, especially those of you listening now, who've run out of those 3 things. I'm not going to say they'll be back tomorrow.
But when the person that you've loved, or the situation that you enjoyed, when that's been taken away from you and not by your own choice, then the other 2 things, faith and hope, do get a bit bashed, don't they? Yes, they then have to recover. They have to have their own resurrection, and you can't make them, can you? You can't avoid them. You can't say, oh well, I'll get my faith back next week, and when I've got that back, then I'll have my hope. It doesn't work like that, really.
Can you imagine for yourself ever completely going under like that and losing it all?
Well, I can't. I can know what it is to think, well, the way I thought God was going to behave isn't the way it would appear to be. I can challenge my more superficial, more kind of childlike assumptions, but I don't know how you get rid of what you know deep inside you. No, because it's put in, isn't it? It's not something you created. Well, that's what I.
No, I think that's a very good point. And we were talking about the lady who wrote to us this week to say she'd come back after a long, long time. But so whatever it was that was in her, she really, really wants it.
Yeah.
And maybe she only had a little tiny drop left.
Yeah.
But I know at the end of it, she said, "I hope it's not too late."
Oh well, if there's one thing we do know. We
Never
do know
too
that.
late, no.
I think
it's never ever too late.
No, I don't think it is. It wasn't. If it wasn't too late for the thief on the cross, it's certainly not too late for somebody who's questioning and struggling and wanting it back. I
was wondering the other day whether the other thief on the cross, the other bloke, after he heard their conversation, said, "Excuse me, can I just say I want to change my what I said earlier? I think I really like what you're doing." I don't know.
I don't think.
I do feel great sorrow for those who are not feeling that they're in the midst of resurrection.
Well, Good Friday's Good Friday, isn't it? I mean, crucifixion is crucifixion.
Yeah.
It hurts like hell.
Will you say a prayer for those people?
I will. Now? Father God, just as when Jesus was on the cross and looked down and saw the agony that those who loved him and never could understand were experiencing. So help us to trust that you look down on those people who are bewildered and hurting and feeling quite lost and confused. And you can't make resurrection happen for them until it does. I do pray for hope, for faith, for love, for every single one of your children over this Easter, that somehow something new, something lovely, something of spring can happen in their lives, even though right now they can't believe that's possible. And again, Father God, we thank you for Jesus. We thank you for Good Friday. We thank you for Easter. And we ask for your blessing on your children, however hard it is for them. Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Okay, well, we're looking forward to Easter Sunday because the family are going to be here. We're going to, I hope, have a very nice day.
Yes,
because we like Easter, don't we?
Yeah.
It's a great, great symbol. Anyway, thank you for being with us once again.
Absolutely. On our third Easter together.
Our third Easter together,
Amazing.
Yes. Can't believe it. And we'll see you next week.
We will do.
If
Bye-bye.
we're all here. Yes,
Yeah.
bye-bye.